Sorry about that, Pickles. We just had to send some documents away.
Hopefully we get our equipment as a result. Yeah. That's awesome. It's a lovely day out there. The trees, it's really nice.
All right, so is there any questions you'd like to ask about the subject matters that we've been discussing up to the point that we stopped for lunch? Would you like to go, Catherine?
Regarding the awareness of sin,
Yep.
because to have a relationship with God, first we need to recognize we have sin.
Yes.
Sorry, say that again for me.
To have a relationship with God, we need to recognise that we have sin.
Yep.
So
Of
my
course, if you
question
don't have any, then you don't need to recognise it.
Apart from that, the opposite I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Having started this, I have seen way too many things that I carry that are sin that I know I have to work. Now,
Yep.
while intellectually I can list so many of them,
Yep.
I see that in my life it's always a struggle, and I'm thinking, okay, so my soul is not ready to feel any of this stuff. And I keep on going, looking at it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I do that every day. Oh, this is a sin. This is a sin.
There I go again, wiping my bottle with paper.
And I'm doing it again. and I list it so much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if anybody were to ask me any question, I have the answer. I truly have it. I just don't do it.
Well, I would argue you don't have the answer either. But
Well, you don't have the faith in doing it, do you, Katerina? You don't actually have the faith that stopping your sin is going to lead to something better. You still believe in your sin.
yeah. You can be aware of your sins, like you can be even intellectually aware that God doesn't like you doing a certain thing. But that doesn't really change. Intellectual awareness is like nothing. In terms of this benefit to you, it's barely above no awareness at all.
Well, this is
And can I just say also, the other problem with intellectual awareness is that it gives you the illusion that you know things.
Yeah.
That you
And
really,
then you're doing better.
that you really in your heart don't know.
No, I don't feel I'm doing better, and I'm the type of person that I think only when something really, really bad happens to me
Yeah.
will I open up to God's help, and it does happen,
Yeah, you and 8 billion others. Yeah.
Yeah.
but it has to be so severe for me. Otherwise, if it's like a chronic
Yeah.
pain or whatever, I live with it. I'm like live with it every day.
Yeah, but you see, there you're not looking at what you get out of it, what you believe you get out of it. See, a lot of what you're raising are issues regarding faith, really. Yeah. So one of the things we probably need to discuss is the issue of what you have faith in. Yeah. Let's call that a corrupt faith. Corrupt faith is interesting because it's a corrupt faith that actually drives your future sin. So your current soul condition is the result of your past sins, you could say. And your future, what you believe in for your future, is what drives, to a large degree, what drives your sin, your desire to sin right now. Right? And the trouble is, we have faith. So you remember what faith is? Faith is the assured expectation of the things we hope for. In other words, we believe that if we do a thing now, we'll get the result in the future we want. Yeah? And we believe it with all of our heart, and that's why we think that it's going to work. Otherwise, if you knew that every action you took today was going to result in a bad thing happening tomorrow, and you really believed that in your heart, can you see, you wouldn't do it, would you? If you believe that if I go and do this one thing today, let's say I go and get a pet for the kids today, and if you believed that that was going to lead to a really, really bad thing happening tomorrow, then you'd go, I don't think it's wise me getting a pet today. I'd sit down with the children, explain why, work through all the issues, because tomorrow this is going to work out bad. You know? Yeah. But if you believe it's going to give you something good tomorrow, then you'll definitely do it today. Can you see that? So a corrupt faith is believing that the things that are, from God's perspective, unloving, you believe are loving. That's what a corrupt faith is all about. And you believe that by doing them, you will get better results, a loving result. Right? So when you say, I know that I'm sinning, a lot of times we only know that because somebody told us that particular action is a sin. Or we can see through ethics, through our analysis of ethics, that if everybody did that to me, I wouldn't like it. So it's got to be a sin, you know. So a lot of times we only know things intellectually via a number of methods, and many of them are related to how it affects me, of course, not really anybody else. So the problem with that state is that if I'm only measuring things based on my own pleasure and my own pain, so if we look at the pleasure-pain thing, so if we look at pleasure and pain, we're not very good at measuring both of those things. Humans in sin are not very good at measuring them. But fundamentally, what most of us want is pleasure right now and no pain right now. Right? And by no pain, we're talking no physical pain, no emotional pain, no spiritual pain. Each of us want to have, like when it comes to spiritually, we want no doubts. We want no investigation. We want, just tell me what it is and I'll do that. That's what we want spiritually. Emotionally, what we want is to not experience any hard emotions. Like sadness, for most of us, is a hard emotion, so you don't want to have it. You know, anger is an easy emotion. The reason why it's easy is because it's power-driven. So we like to have anger. But when it comes to things like sadness, which is a harder emotion because it's not power-driven, you have to really surrender to it, not a power emotion, most of us don't like that at all. So there are certain emotions we like, certain emotions we don't like, right? And so our definition of pain is not to feel the emotions we don't like. You know, if we have to feel the emotions we don't like, then that's painful. We don't want to do that, so I don't want to close all that down. Pleasure is, I want to get whatever makes me feel comfortable right now, good about myself right now. Now, good about yourself can be good about yourself spiritually, good about yourself emotionally, good about yourself sexually, good about yourself physically, can't it? So it can be good about appearance. So here's another sin. Going to get some Botox. Right, that might give you the instant pleasure of looking a bit better in your face right now, right? But you're just injecting substances. Sooner or later, as you can see in the faces of 70 or 80-year-olds who have done it regularly, they end up looking grotesque, right? But sooner or later it's going to be of detriment, and yet we're not interested in the latter, we're interested in the now, right now. We don't have a long-term view of our future at all. And in fact, when it comes to the spirit world, we sort of go, so what? Our general, see, if you were really thinking about your life properly, you'd be going, I live here maybe 70, maybe 90, maybe 100 years if I'm unlucky. Said on purpose, unlucky. If you live here for 100 years, you're probably unlucky. But anyway, because, spirit world's got better capacity for the soul to grow, better capacity for spiritual development, better capacity for doing things. You can move about better. You don't need aeroplanes, and you don't need customs, and you don't need you're unlucky if you have to stay here longer than you need to learn things, right? Anyway, and so if I stay here 100 years, I'm pretty unlucky, but let's say I have stayed here for 100 years. Compared to how long I'm going to be in the spirit world, so you think 2,000 years down the track, so now it's 4024 AD, right, on Earth, and you're looking down and going, look at all those gizmos they had when I wasn't there, whatever, and you're in the spirit world, and you're looking back over your 2,000 years of life. Do you think the first 100 is going to matter to you much? Right? Can you see we don't have a very long-term view of our future, do we? It's just like, get the most of what I can get right now with my 100 years of life, avoiding as much as I can right now, getting rid of as much pain as I can. Try not to learn very much if you can get away with it. You know, isn't that the average person's view? It's like, you know, we go to school until we're, what is it here, 18? And then you go maybe to university if you're unlucky. Well, you know, that's how the average person feels, isn't it? Like, oh, I have to go to university because I've got to get a job, and I've got to get a job because I've got to earn money. But if I didn't have to get a job and earn money, how many people would actually go? You know, just for the sake of learning. I mean, you know, not a lot, right? So for the most of us, by the time we're in our early 20s, we have a view of learning that try to avoid as much learning as you possibly can and just get on with life and you just be comfortable. We're not considering ourselves to be never-ending learning beings. We don't have the same striving for learning that we had when we were in our childhood, because there is for many adults, we don't feel a motive for the learning. The motive being that you have joy and you have you have greater capacity to experience life, and there's all sorts of things to learn. Like most of us only learn the physical, you know, which is what we're doing when we go to uni, right? We're learning. Like I learned electronics engineering. Right? How much electronics engineering am I going to be doing in the spirit world?
Yeah.
That's zero. Yeah, thank goodness. And so it's like we do this learning because we're taught, well, you've got to make life, you know, ends meet in this life, and you've got to get ahead in the life and whatever. And so we do the learning, but we don't have a motive on the whole for learning for the sake of our growth, for the sake of our continual development. In fact, in a lot of ways, we're looking at learning and we're going, you just do it because you have to the point where you can get a job, and then after that, do the least amount you can. Be comfortable is the general view we have on earth, isn't it? Just get to a stage where you're comfortable, and once you're comfortable, hold on to it for dear life. That's the general viewpoint. It's not, I just want to keep growing, or keep on learning, or keep on giving away my past and keep moving towards my future. If we had a proper faith, that's what we would do. But we don't do that. We have a corrupt faith, and so we start measuring everything about instantaneous pleasure or instant-based or instantaneous pain. And it's all about avoiding the pain and feeling the pleasure. Right? That's the general focus on earth. We're not planning for our future, because our future is like, if you think about 100 years on earth and then 2,000 years, you think about the percentages there. It's less than 5%, right, of your life, and you're only 2,000 years old. And I know people who are 179,000 years old. And do you think their few hundred years of life on earth, in the case of some of them, they lived nearly 900 years on earth? And even then, it's not very long compared to their long time in the spirit world. So the earth life becomes a distant, faint memory that you can barely recall. Even. Yeah. So the problem is we don't believe all that. What we believe is you got to make ends meet in this life. It's got to all be about this life. It's all got to be about getting ahead in this life, doing what's easiest in this life. And because we're doing what is ever easy in this life, we're neglecting the fact that we're breaking laws in this life that are going to come back at us in the next life. So we neglect all that as well, and awareness of all that. We're not planning for the future. It's like you guys, if you were planning to go to Australia, you wouldn't just sit back on your backside and do nothing, would you? You would go, right, I've got to book a trip. I've got to get some accommodation. I've got to know how to get there. I've got to know if I want to come home. I've got to know how to come home. I've got to find out what the laws are in Australia. If I'm going to drive the car, I've got to organise a vehicle and do that. There's a whole heap of things you're going to have to do if you go to a place. We're going to the spirit world for the rest of your life. Doesn't it make sense that you would plan a bit?
Yes.
for it. The average person doesn't, because we have a corrupt faith. We don't even believe that, even when we're told about it, we don't even believe in it. The reason why I know that, because most of you don't plan for it, even when you're told about it. Even though many of you say you believe there is an afterlife, right now you're still not planning for it, which is indicative of the fact that the faith isn't strong enough to really feel this is coming up soon. And when I say soon, for some of you it might be 70 years away, for others of you it might be 5. Right? But it's soon, either way, it's coming up. So why not make some plans? The reason why is because we have a corrupt faith, because we don't really, in our heart, see the importance. Make sense to everyone? Mm-hmm. We think it, and we think we get it, but we don't in our emotional state. So we're in this state of pleasure versus pain, and when we get pleasure, we think great. We get pain, we think terrible. Right? Now, feeling sin is going to be about feeling pain. So we're basically saying, feel pain, terrible. Feeling sin, terrible. Now, as soon as I'm in that state, I'm not going to acknowledge my sin. If I don't acknowledge my sin, I'm not going to become aware of my sin emotionally or even intellectually. But intellectually, you may be aware there are certain things that you've been taught from, and those of you who've heard Divine Truth for years, you've been taught that those things are wrong, right? But that doesn't mean you believe it. Because if you believed it, you wouldn't keep doing them. It just means that you've been taught and you think you know. So, Katerina, that's the problem, is that there's a whole heap of things you think you know, but emotionally, you don't believe them. And if you don't believe them emotionally, there will be no change. And you even go, oh, look at what I'm doing. So here I am wiping my bum with my paper. A physical act. And for those of you, if you think about toilet paper, right, most of you think it's just a normal fact of life nowadays, isn't it, toilet paper? But if you think about it, it's a single-use item. You're destroying a tree to create it and a number of other resources to create it. It's a single-use item, and after you've used it, it goes straight into landfill or into the sewage system or whatever. How much resources are being used to do that when I could actually just wash my bottom and use a towel to wipe it, just, like we used to in the olden days. There's a big difference between one and the other. One is a renewable resource that you're using like a towel over and over again. You wash it each time, use it over and over again. So it's quite obvious it's not economical. And you imagine 8 billion people doing this once a day. How many trees? And then you imagine all those trees are not, they're all just growing for 30 years, getting cut down, growing for 30 years, getting cut down, growing for 30 or 40 years, getting cut down. Now, in that time, wherever they're getting grown, no other part of the environment can get established. So no animals can live there because their environment's going to disappear in 30 years. So that even if animals come in, whatever animals are in that place where they get cut down, all of them are going to go, be destroyed as well. They've got no home anymore, there's no food anymore, they're going to go, right? And we're not considering this as a part of our analysis when we're wiping our bottom. That's just an example. We're not thinking about the future. We're just thinking about the pleasure or the ease in the present. And it's, by the way, it's not even pleasurable. Is it? Like, washing your bottom is a lot more pleasurable than wiping it. But so we just do it without even thinking because it's just normal. And yet we're not considering the ramifications.
Emotions about food. That's
what
we just got weird emotions about
weird
food.
emotions about your excrement. Yeah.
And this is something that I want to pick up on. You're talking about your
physical thing,
but also a future, like your spirit world preparation.
Yeah.
But if you're honest with yourself, you're not happy in your life right now. But you're thinking, even when you're saying, oh, this is a sin, this is a sin, if you're really sensitive to your life right now, you'd know, I'm not actually very happy. But the corrupt faith says this is as happy as you're going to get.
Yeah.
You have to seek avoidance from your unhappiness with this sin, because this is the best it can get. So the corrupt faith is that it can't get any better. If I go through some short-term pain, my life won't improve, is what your faith is saying, rather than the truth, which is if I am willing to go through my awakening to sin and feel some short-term pain, life will improve. The majority of people who are in the state you're in, who are like, oh, this is a sin, I've heard one truth, yeah, I know, they haven't dealt with their corrupt faith, which is saying, dealing with emotion is not going to improve my life. Giving up sin is not going to improve my life. The best I can hope for is this sin in terms of pleasure. When you start the process, you start to feel like, oh gosh, everything I thought was pleasurable was actually a bit of a drag, but it was just a distraction, or it was just like a short-term hit to get me away from how dissatisfied I am with my life. And when you start to deal with your sin, you start to go, oh, actually now I feel better without having to engage I don't have to drink coffee, and I don't have to talk to my girlfriend for an hour to get over, how annoyed I am with my husband or whatever it is. I don't have to do any of those things, and I just feel better all the time. But the corrupt faith is saying that's not possible. And that's why every day you go, oh, this is sin, this is sin, this is sin. But you don't ever change it.
Yeah, because substantially in your heart, you don't believe it's a sin.
You believe it's a good thing. It's an asset. It's a thing I'm using to cope with my life.
Or a thing I have to do to survive.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing.
Yeah, and that's the sin fighting for itself.
That's
I
right.
have to do this to survive. I have to do this I can't cope otherwise. If I don't have this, it's the end of the world.
Yep.
All that is the sin fighting for itself.
Yeah. So the corrupt faith drives this sort of thing of pleasure now, pain, avoid pain now, without seeing actually that a lot of times pleasure now is at the expense of pain in your future. Like any person who's really logical would go, hang on a sec, if this pleasurable thing now is going to cause me pain in the future, so example of that, drinking too much, alcohol. Pleasure now, seemingly, results in hangover tomorrow. And I consider the hangover to be worse than anything you could gain from the drink. So once you start weighing it all up, you'd go, why would I do that? I don't see any point to that, right? So then people go, a little bit of drink. Well, yes, but let's look at all the other pains that other people have caused from that little bit of drink. In Australia, we provide a lot of grapes for harvesting for alcohol. They're destroying whole swathes of the environment in order to plant vineyards.
Where it used to be fruit growing or food growing areas, now they've converted farms into
vineyards.
Wine growing regions.
Yeah. So it used to be lots of different varieties of fruits. Now it's just vineyards. Right. As far as the eye can see. You only drive past them. You can drive for like hundreds of kilometres, and that's all you see. Yeah. And you don't see any native environment. There's no animals there anymore. So for most of us, we're also going pleasure for me now, not pleasure for everyone now. Pleasure for me now. Pain, avoid pain for me now. Now, if me avoiding pain means that you've got to feel something, I'm happy with that. Right? Example of that is, I feel like I want to have a yell at you, so I'm going to have a yell at you. I get some pleasure out of that. I get to feel a bit of power out of that. I don't care how you feel about it, whether you feel bad about it and how bad you feel about it and how torn down you feel. And I don't care about any of that. All I care about is I get to get mine now, right? And we're not even considering in this equation who's got the pleasure and who's got the pain. We're just in our own little selfish world.
Which takes us back to the spiritual principle that's being broken about equality.
Yeah.
I'm saying my pleasure is more important than yours.
Yeah. So if I was truly focused on pleasure, I'd be focused on yours as much as mine. In other words, I'd care about whether what I do makes your life more miserable or not, or what I do brings me pleasure and you pleasure. Right? That's what I'd care about. If I really cared about you, I'd care that that's the case, right? So, but when I'm just focused on mine and I don't care about you, then I've broken the principle of equality. So, big sin, one of the biggest sins you can commit towards a person, actually. I'm broken there and then, and I'm happy with it because I get the pleasure now. I'm just worried about me getting mine now, what I want now, right? So, the assessment. So when you think you know there's a sin and you keep doing it, it really means you don't feel it as a sin.
Yeah.
So you don't know that it's a sin, right? You've only been told, and that's not the same as you knowing. You see the difference?
Yeah.
So religions will tell you lots of things about what sins are. You know, Christian faith, Muslim faith, and a lot of other faiths do have a feeling of what's morally right and what is morally wrong. And they tell you, you shouldn't do this, you should do that, you shouldn't do this, you should do that. Now, some of the things they're way off being with, of course. Right? For example, if a woman teaches in a congregation, that's a bad thing. You know that many fundamentalist Christians and Muslims believe that. Right? That's why there's only men clerics in many religions, right? Because they believe that. Now, that's obviously wrong. It's not equal. It's not based on equality, men and women. If they were equal, surely men can teach, then surely women should be able to teach too, right? And the fact that they're not allowed means that there's something wrong with the religion, right? But if you're invested in those belief systems, you're going to feel there's something wrong being told the opposite to that. And this is the trouble, is that most religious faiths do tell you what is right and what is wrong. Sometimes they've got it right, and a lot of times they've got it wrong. But even in the places where they've got it right, you're only getting told. It's not a feeling. So for most people, they feel it as guilt rather than feeling it as, this actually feels wrong. So when you're told from childhood that a certain course of behaviour is wrong, and you're punished for when it was wrong and so forth, you don't grow up having a sense that it's actually wrong. You grow up with a sense that it's wrong to get caught, which is different than being wrong. You know. And this is the trouble: is that we grow up in these environments that are encouraging you to not use your heart and use your head alone. Right? So when it comes to the assessment of sin, a lot of you will go, but I know that's a sin and I know that's a sin. I'm saying, do you still do it? Yes. Then you don't know it's one. Because if you knew it was one, you would feel it was one. And if you feel it's one, you can't do it anymore. So you don't know it's one, you just think it's one. And why do you think it's one? Well, usually it's because we've been told by somebody.
Now, if you're in the state, if we go back to your example, Katerina, where you've heard a lot of divine truth and you see the logic. You see the logic and you see, logically this is a sin, but you're not yet feeling that it's a sin. What's happening there? What is happening there? For you to, it appeals to your intellect, can we say that?
Yes.
Yeah.
It appeals to your intellect, but it's not yet shifted into your emotional state.
Exactly.
Why would that be?
There's got to be reasons, right?
I'm assuming I don't want to.
Why?
Why though?
Oh, yeah.
This is where the sincerity comes in.
This is where the
This
work
is
is.
the work on the sin.
Yeah.
This is, intellectually knowing and reminding yourself, if you are anyone in this situation where you think this is a sin, but actually I don't care, I'm doing it, that means that emotionally you haven't awakened. You're not even really emotionally aware of the sin, let alone awakened to it.
No.
There has to be anger driving that. There is angry justification of the sin. Otherwise, it would seamlessly flow from your intellect to your heart, and you go, I can't do that.
Yeah.
But when that doesn't happen, you've got
In other words, Mary's saying there's got to be emotions that are sins themselves
that are
preventing you from seeing the sin of what you're engaging at the time.
Which is why I highlighted the issue of faith with you, because often it's because we feel angrily, this is the best I can get. there will be no good of me giving up this thing. There's a lot of emotional work to be done to actually awaken to your sin. So when you go, oh, well, I know it's a sin, but I just keep doing it, it's like denying responsibility for the fact that you've got emotional work to do to actually awaken to the sin. If you just try and restrict your behaviour and go, I'm never doing that again, the only way that might help is that you might expose the anger. But if you deny the anger, then you're just like living in a very facade-based state where you're controlling your actions, but you're not actually dealing with the sin, you're not awakening to the sin.
Yeah, and that's what it feels like, because like after all these years and after all this stuff and after all that, I'm keeping myself in that little space, and I still don't feel the freedom that I have felt, like, you know, in certain trickles that I have processed some stuff that I never did again, because I'm like, oh.
Exactly.
So I know the difference, but then I guess all the other stuff, I'm just kind of keeping myself contained in this little place that keeps me
a
happy.
person who sins is going to be bound by the law more tightly as time goes on. So you're going to be bound eventually. You begin by being bound spiritually, and then it develops into being bound emotionally. So in other words, you're constipated emotionally. You can't have emotions anymore. You know, you can't have feelings anymore. And then you're bound sexually as well. Eventually you get to that stage where you can't even have sex anymore.
You
right?
Can't enjoy it.
And then you get bound physically as well. You start getting illnesses that restrict your ability to function in your life on earth even. That's how it goes. And that's the consequences of sin. This is the net result of sin. That most of the world is in complete ignorance of by choice. You know, it's quite obvious that our bad choices are creating a bad world, but by choice we try to blame it on other people too. You know, it must be the governments, and it must be the religions, and it must be the big enterprises, and it's never us. It's always somebody else, right? And so, in that state, you're basically saying, I'm happy to continue my sin because my corrupt faith tells me that there's really no other choice that is better than me continuing my sin. Right? And unfortunately for most of us, we never experience better to know how better could be. How nice it could be, things being better. We never experience that because we're so embroiled in our own sin. And our sin will bring us the painful consequences of the sin. Even in our physical state, that's what it brings us. So we never get to feel what better feels like even. On earth in particular. Right? And so that just encourages the corrupt faith. And we get into this state of like doubt and hopelessness. Whereas what's the point of doing anything good on earth? I might as well just get mine now, my pleasure now, and avoid my pain now, and just like wait to the spirit world to sort that out later. Hopefully things are better there. And you know they're not better there actually,
and
in that regard.
All you're doing is reinforcing your corrupt faith rather than feeling it, because corrupt faith is emotional within you. That feeling, it can't actually get better, is an emotion that you need to go through.
A painful one.
A painful emotion. But when you live in it, you just reinforce it to yourself, you let your anger build, and when you enter the spirit world, it's still going to be with you, and it's going to take a change in sincerity to want to actually deal with what's inside of you, and then you will experience, as you rightly said, there's a lot of freedom when you deal with sin, because you're not always trying to avoid something. You spend a lot of energy on earth trying to avoid our pain, and it wastes a lot of energy, and you also feel a freedom. You don't feel tempted towards sin. You feel just peaceful in yourself more. But when you're doing this thing where you're just continually justifying the momentary avoidance, the seeking of, I don't even call it pleasure, because that's like blasphemous to pleasure, really what most of our addictions are. You know, they're not actually that fun, are they? But they are what we feel is the best we can get. And that's why we keep engaging them, keep engaging them. And that's you don't recognise how good things can be until you're willing to sincerely deal with some short-term pain rather than seek that avoidance.
And the only difference between here and the spirit world is when you arrive in the spirit world, if you're in the state of sin, you're not going to be living in a nice house. You're not going to be living with nice people you can talk to anymore. You're not going to be living in a nice, pretty environment that you can go to the beach occasionally and you can go off enjoying this river occasionally, and go off enjoying this nature occasionally. You're going to be living exactly where your soul's sin has placed you. And for most people on earth, that's in the hells. It's dark, dingy, smelly, very uncomfortable. And that's usually the only thing that saves people from committing more sin. Because their environment starts degrading, even in the spirit world, if they commit more. And that's usually the only thing that stops them. Is I get a connection now between my environment in the spirit world and my sin, and so I go, well, maybe I should stop sinning. But even then, it's still pretty selfish. Yeah. They're not stopping for any other reason than it hurts themselves more. Right? And this is why, if you can do this on earth, you can end up a far less selfish person than you would if you do it in the spirit world. Because on earth, you start doing it not just for yourself, but for other people's sake as well. It's a gift you give to everyone, not just yourself, the less sin you commit. Yeah, so very important to see corrupt faith is a big driver. What you believe for your future, what you believe your actions will give you in your future will drive your decisions. And if you believe that your sin will give you the best outcome, you will continue doing it even if you think you know it's a sin. And because you won't feel it's a sin. To change, you're going to have to feel it's one. And by the way, you won't be forgiven by God until you feel it's one. So you can know it's one, but you won't be forgiven until you feel it's one. Right? And that's why most people receive a little bit of God's love at the beginning when they hear about God's love being available, and then they don't receive any more their entire life on earth frequently. All of my friends in the first century, barring Mary and John and a few others, all of my friends in the first century, most of them entered the hells. They'd heard me preach and they'd seen me perform miracles and everything for years, many of them, some of them for more than 10 years, and they still arrived in the hells. Because in their heart, they still wanted to sin. Make sense? Yeah. Yep.
So I think I've gone through a couple rounds of this where I think I'm awakening, I feel it, but I get paralyzed because the way you're describing the sins in the hierarchy, like everything I'm doing is a sin. So then I'm, like the different rounds I've gone through is everything I'm eating, drinking, every piece of plastic, right? So first I got paralyzed with, recycle, I can't know what to eat.
And by the way, recycling's a sin too.
Yeah, so this is what happens.
The way it's done at the moment, it's a sin. But go on.
Yeah, no, so
So you try to stop one sin and you commit another one.
And I get paralyzed, and I know it's fear, so I work through
So when you're paralyzed, what happens? You stop acting at all, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. So I get through like that round, but now I feel like I'm in another round of just fear. I get paralyzed and I don't do any action. Yeah. And that feels awful.
Yeah. Because that is also a sin.
Yeah.
And this is what most people find, is that when one sin's pointed out, you try another one. When that's pointed out, you try another one. When that's pointed out, try another one. And then when that's all pointed out, you go, well, I'm not doing anything then. So try that. And when that's pointed out that that's a sin, now you start getting frustrated and potentially angry, which is where you probably needed to go right from the beginning. Yeah. Right? Then you start getting frustrated and angry, right? And then in the frustration and anger, you can start feeling, I really want these things.
I want it to be easy. I don't want to, I don't want to have to work through all this worry about what is the right thing anyway. I don't want to have to get it maybe wrong. I want it, I want my comforts. Why isn't anyone else doing this? Like all these things come up.
Yeah. And so you do need to go through that cycle, getting to the point where you realise actually, while the emotion exists of anger within, that basically is saying, why can't I do these things? What's wrong with it? Why does God feel that's so bad? And once we go through that, then you you're able to start feeling, oh, this is why it's bad. And by becoming to know why something is bad at an emotional level, that's when you start feeling like, oh, I don't want to do that anymore because it's bad, rather than just thinking it's bad or being told it's bad. So what we've noticed is a lot of people, when they hear Divine Truth, they hear us, Mary and I, and we've purposefully, by the way, in this trip, taken away your toilet paper, your pets, and your just to help you come to terms with that most of the things we do are actually sins.
Yeah.
This is why the earth is in the hells, because most of the people on earth are committing sins all the time that we don't think are sins, but they're actually sins. And it's good to know that, because you get frustrated in the end. You go, well, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore, in the sense of, you make a decision of either you're not going to do the sin anymore, so that's the intellectual choice not to do it, or you go, I don't want to do Divine Truth anymore. But both of those things won't change anything. What needs to change is the heart needs to change, and the only way the heart will change is to get rid of your rage about why you think sin is good. Yeah. And in other words, get rid of the corrupt faith, because that's what's driving that rage. You understand? There's corrupt faith saying, I should be able to do these things. We're just human. We're just having a human life. God should have made it different if he wanted us not to do these things. We're tempted to blame God, anybody else, religion, our upbringing, your husband, your wife, your children, your parents, your everything other than your sin. Right? And once you get to the stage of going, it's my sin that's causing all of me to do all of these things, that's the beginning of your awareness. Now from there you can awaken to the point where you feel the sin is bad, and then you'll go into repentance. But without that process, remember, it's an emotional process. It's not something you're going to be able to intellectually manufacture. But the good thing about restricting your sins is that eventually you get angry about it. And then you realise how much you want to sin. Don't you?
Yeah.
And then you go, look at all the things I do. I try to avoid it, and I try to get away with it here, and I try to reason it out there, and I try to make out it looks good here, and I try to blame this person, I try to minimise the problem over there, and I try to justify my action here. And these are all the things. This is what it feels like to have your sin fight for itself. That's what it feels like. Frustrating is what it feels.
So even the paralysis you're describing is actually sin fighting for itself.
Correct. Yeah. And it's just another step in the process of becoming aware. And at some point we need to be able to measure ourselves clearly and go, here I am in that stage of it. Before I'm in the stage of ignoring it all, now and denying it all, and then after a while I'm in the state of, I sort of accept logically that, what Jesus said about toilet paper is probably true, because of the economy principle and the trees getting cut down and all the environment getting destroyed and all that. It's possibly true. So stop using toilet paper. But I don't want to use toilet paper, right? So what do? Like I go, I just ignore him as being stupid now. He's being really pedantic about the sin. It can't be that bad. Surely God lets us get away with that. And you start going down. So that's the reasoning mode. That's you could say that's the
bargaining.
The first, isn't that the first point of grief?
Yeah. No, denial is first.
Denial is first.
Then we're bargaining.
And then we're bargaining. Sorry. So deny first, and then we're bargaining. We're trying to bargain with it all. Still don't want to feel angry. Still don't want to see that it's bad. Then what do? We abscond from life. We get all, bitter about it. We start getting angry with the people around us. All of these things are methods that the sin uses to fight for itself. And you can see people all of you have pet ones. Like ones that worked in your childhood that you now as an adult are used to using because they worked, right? So like if with your mum and dad avoidance worked, then sitting down reading a book is probably where you're going to go. But if you withdraw, step back from everything in your anger. If having a yelling, screaming match with your mum and dad causing to back off, then that's where you'll probably go with your sin, right? If putting on a pretty facade that you know what's going on and you really have worked it out and you'll do good as long as everybody sees you doing it, right? But when you're by yourself, you still, eat your chocolate, wipe your bottom with the toilet paper, and then that's where you'll go then. That's another way. That's another way, isn't it? Put on a good front for everybody else, but by myself privately, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. So we do that. If that worked in my childhood, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. And we notice here in the USA that's a pretty favourite one, actually. What you do in private, very separate to what you do in public, that kind of thing, There's even laws, isn't there? In a lot of states you have here laws about what a person does in private versus public and not, and all this kind of stuff. And it's all encouraged by some societies more than others too, it depends where you grow up. So, in Greece, have a good anger spit is probably encouraged.
Anger spit?
Yeah, where you just... have a yell and a scream.
Have a spit is like the upwheel for just like losing your temper.
Losing your temper.
Yeah, tantrum.
Right? Losing your temper is not a bad thing necessarily, but you do it in the States, and it's like, unless it's sport. Unless it's sport or
Super Bowl.
Breach of peace, $10 fine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. So in each country even there's standards of what is appropriate behaviour for dealing with problems. And so in your family there's been standards, in your country there's been standards, and you've got a few favourites that you go to, and when they don't work, usually a person gets more and more frustrated. And this is one reason why a lot of people get very frustrated with me, is because every one of them generally doesn't work with me, and so they get more and more and more angry as a result. Because I just say, there you go again, and another sin, just to be helpful. It's not a judgment or anything. It's just like you gotta understand what it feels like fighting for your sin, right? Because if you don't understand what it feels like, you're not going to give it up. So it's really good if somebody can just point it out and go, there you go again, there you go again, there you go again. Oh, look at the turns. And the reality is, most of us have invented about 10 to 12 favourites, and by the time we get to number 10, generally it's a pretty remotely used one, because usually all the others have worked for us before then. And so we have our favourites, and then we have our less favourites and our less favourites and our least favourite methods. But the very least favourite method we have is actually feeling the grief associated with each sin. That's the thing that is our least favourite. And everything else is all created just to avoid that process. And what amazes me the most is that it's not very economical. Because it's like, let's say, here's your problem, right? Here's your sin. Here's the emotion that you need to feel to release that sin. What's the fastest way there? The route is the fastest way there, is it not? What do? We go...
Stop for a while. Stop.
break.
And then we visit the other ones again. And eventually, who knows when, right? Because it's going to be dependent upon your will. I get there.
Pretty weak.
Now, can you see, in that meandering, I have wasted a lot of my life, which is another penalty of not dealing with your sin as soon as you can. You end up wasting time and energy and effort, and you waste relationships. You lose friends in this process of doing this. If you're going to lose a friend, lose them now. Don't wait for 25 years to lose them, because you'll be more attached in 25 years. It's going to be harder. If you going from there to there is going to cause your friends to not like you, then you're better off going from there to there now than doing all of this and eventually ending up there anyway and they still don't like you. You understand? It's like God's way is the most economical way of dealing with the problem. But we don't think that because our corrupt faith says, no, my way's better. My way meandering around the entire universe is better than going from one to the other. Right?
And can I just point out this thing that happens where we start to look at one sin. Maybe we have the conscience highlights us to, oh, something's a sin here. Or you hear Jesus say something, you go, oh, okay, I'll look at that. And then this thing happens where you go, everything I do is a sin. Be very careful of that.
Yeah, that's not actually true.
It's not true. It's true that a lot of things we do is sin, but the number one thing you get out of that is avoiding the very thing that you started to look at.
Yeah, you
get you catastrophize.
Yeah, you induce a state of fake hopelessness.
Of I can't. It's everything is a sin. Can you see that you've just distracted yourself from that one thing you were going to deal with? So just be very careful of that. And understand that every awakening to sin is an emotional process. It's not a matter of you will make physical changes, but you need to let yourself go through an emotional process around each one. Because if you just run around trying to be the police on your own behaviour and trying to avoid guilt, which a lot of women
go shopping.
Have.
You go past the chocolate ice cream.
You really want it.
And there's vanilla ice cream. And there's vegan ice cream. But you really like the chocolate ice cream. You see, it's sort of like, I got to take this vanilla vegan ice cream. So are you doing it with a heart then you go past the next aisle? What's the next aisle? Bicky aisle. The biscuit. What do you call them here? Cookies. And so you go past the cookie aisle. It's then there's all the cookie. There's the marshmallow filled creams and all those things. And then you get down to the oatmeal. No, no anything other than flour, water. So all of this is being driven by the mind saying, I should do it, but the heart's going, I don't want to do it. I don't feel like doing it. It doesn't feel good to me. So you can see from what Mary just said earlier, you've got to get to the stage where you feel it's wrong before you'll stop. And if you stop before you feel it's wrong, then you're actually wrong. Because that's another sin. Understand? Now, I'm not saying
go willy-nilly.
I'm just saying, isn't it better to feel it's wrong?
Yeah. Don't kid yourself.
Don't kid yourself.
And also, don't confuse guilt with awakening to sin.
Yeah, not the same thing.
No. So, guilt is very often a self-punishing emotion. or what we label guilt is self-punishment. So there's true guilt.
Well, yeah,
there's true.
Well, there's three types really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So there's true guilt. I feel like something is wrong. That's actually a part of.
And it is.
And it is God's definition, and it's truly a feeling that I have, and it's a pure feeling. I feel it's wrong. That's part of awakening to sin. But very often on earth, there's these other things that we call guilt. One is, I'm this a terrible, terrible person, and I've got to do anything I can to avoid this guilt. And it's sort of a feeling of blame and responsibility that we've been taught, many women have been taught this, to take on as a child. And it's just like a compulsion, I've got to get away from this feeling. And that's not what we're teaching you about, actually.
Yeah.
That's a sin, that feeling.
Yeah.
Then there's a third type of guilt, which is really a manipulation of the world around us. Oh, I feel so bad about that. You're right, Jesus, that is a sin. Oh, and I'm so bad, aren't I? I'm just so bad.
And part and parcel with that is, when you were children, generally you were taught to punish yourself in order to get away from punishment from others.
Yes,
Right.
so that's the third thing I'm showing you. And oftentimes there's not even a true feeling of the pure guilt or even of self-berating. And that one is just purely,
It's
I've
just
learned...
like, mummy or daddy think that's wrong, so I've got to act like it's wrong.
And they'll get off my back.
And they'll get off my back.
Yeah. So don't conflate the idea of awakening with sin with those two last examples I gave, which are actually sins in themselves. One of them is taking on a feeling of self-attack and self-responsibility rather than humbly working through what is God's truth about a matter. And the third one is actually a facade, which is all about manipulating my environment. So, yeah, just...
Which, by the way, you people in the US are very good at doing.
That third
Number
one.
3.
Yeah.
Do you notice that?
Yes.
You're very good at it. It's obviously many of you were taught this in your childhoods. It often comes from a very religious upbringing.
Yeah.
Where a person's had a very religious upbringing, they're taught to act a certain way but not feel it. And they're taught to act a certain way, act guilty, act in a way that mum and dad get off your back side, from hitting you. And you act a certain way, and that way you get away with behaviour that, by the way, God doesn't respond to any of that, right? But we think we get away with behaviour with people, and we often do. Yeah.
Dan?
So when I was listening to you for years about the possibility of becoming a vegetarian or stopping eating animal products.
Yep.
So I went through that process of, at first, I didn't even hear it.
Yeah.
And then it started kind of building in me, and I had a lot of fear about it.
Yeah.
And then I took it on for a while, and then a doctor...
The health will decay if you do that, yeah.
What's that?
Your health will decay if you do it that way.
Well, he said, because of certain things that I was dealing with, it'd probably be good if you reintroduced meat back into your diet. So I against my better feeling, I did that for about a year.
Yeah, driven by fear of health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then it did come to the point where the pain of continuing that action was so clear to me that it was not even a decision anymore. It just stopped, and so that was great.
Yeah.
But what I'm really getting to is that, like Tara was saying, I feel like there's thousands of different things that I have not dealt with.
Yep.
We're calling them sins today.
Yeah.
Shame, fear, anger.
Yep.
And sometimes it feels overwhelming.
Yep.
I don't even know sometimes maybe that's part of my conversation, but what I say to myself is I don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
How am I gonna develop the time to devote to each one of these things? I've got my life, I'm working, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I just don't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's very painful.
Yep.
Yep.
And also it causes you to feel guilty about not doing anything.
Right.
Yep.
So
So
where I am, where one of my intentions of being here this weekend with you both, everybody, is to maybe just get back to the most basic things of what are the steps that I can take in the moment when I'm aware of something that comes up.
Yep.
Where do I go with that? What do I do
Okay.
with that?
So what you've just described is what I just drew, isn't it? You've gone around the place.
Yeah.
And then you get paralysed because you're like, oh, it's not too much, and like, what do I do with it?
Yeah. So that is a state that most of you possibly who have heard Divine Truth for a while can recognise. Yeah? Okay, so what causes that state? What causes the meandering through life, hoping for a better outcome, without seeing that while I could carry the sin with me, I'm not going to have a better outcome?
Corrupt faith.
Yeah.
So the corrupt faith drives that, but what corrupt faith? What?
Fear.
Well,
Let's be really specific.
let's look at fear.
Yeah. Because fear is very general.
Fear is an addiction, yeah. By the way.
Yeah.
Fear is an addiction. Yeah. What does fear give you?
Excuse.
It gives you an excuse. Now you see, when most of us are growing up, and particularly in Western society, this is also the case, so it's the same in Australia as it is here, and the same in Europe in particular, we're taught basically that anything you're afraid of, you shouldn't have to do.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So what comes along with that belief, that corrupt faith, that everything you're afraid of you shouldn't have to do, is this belief inside of you that you shouldn't have to do anything that causes you to be uncomfortable. Right? In other words, that doesn't bring you anything that doesn't bring you pleasure, and let's define pleasure as comfort in this case. Right? Anything that's not comfort is pain. Right? Anything that makes me comfortable, that's what I'll do. Anything that makes me uncomfortable, I have to avoid that as much as I'm able to. Fear says, don't tell yourself the truth about that. Fear is your false expectations. Or what are expectations? Aren't they faiths? So it's your false faith appearing real. Right? It's you're saying that what you have faith in is actually true, and that God's way, which is the truth, based on truth, which is the opposite to fear actually, because fear is everything false. So truth is the antidote to fear. So when we get in this state where we're meandering around, the sin, where we're meandering around the emotion that is inside of us, that where the sin is stored, the reason why we're doing it is because we do not want to face the truth. So then we've got to ask ourselves, well, what truths don't I want to face? What truth causes me to do such things? So an example of that. Let's look at just the very, you could say, small example of eating meat versus, having a vegan diet, right? So let's look at that. The doctor says to me, you need to eat meat for your health. Now, that is true only if I don't deal with the emotions associated with what happens when I choose a vegan diet and why I wanted the meat diet in the first place. Right? So if I don't address those emotions, then yes, you will get sicker having a vegan diet. Everybody who does not address those emotions, having a vegan diet, you will get more ill. But where does fear kick in? The doctor says, someone in authority says to me, you're going to get ill. Your health is degrading. I want to live for 100 years on earth. Not 70 or 60 or 50, but 100. For some unknown reason. What is that unknown reason? I don't have faith for a start in the afterlife, but also I feel that I want to maximise my experience on earth to be normal, like what everybody else views as normal as well. And in amongst all that, I've got what my family view as normal, what my friends view as normal, what my partner views as normal. Everybody around me. And so if I take on a diet which not a diet, by the way, it's just what you eat.
That is a diet, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a diet in the sense of I'm dieting vegan. It's my normal things that I eat are all plant-based, right? I take on that diet. I'm not just taking on a diet. I'm taking on the emotions of my partner, the emotions of my family, the emotions of my children, the emotions of my society, the emotions of people at work. I'm taking on a confrontation now, which the average person is not emotionally prepared to do. Because every person around me is going to start treating me differently. They're going to treat me condescendingly. They're going to ridicule me at times. They're going to make fun of me at times. They're going to think I'm silly. They're going to come up with all sorts of reasonable explanations, including my health, but also a lot of other explanations as to why I should continue that particular diet. None of them understand the sin of the diet. And so naturally they're not looking at that as an important thing. They're just looking at all the other things. Now what's going to happen is I'm getting a lot of pressure now. I'm getting a lot, what we'd call it when you were small, you would call it peer pressure is what you'd call it. But you're getting a lot of pressure. Some of this pressure gets pretty full on. Like full on. Like we've had, Mary and I get like average 50 death threats a year at least, and then some when the media's going 1,000 death threats. Like, right? Death threats for just teaching about love. It's amazing. Amazing. And doing it for free. Right. You should see how many criticisms we get for doing it for free. It's sort of like, what are you doing? You're manipulating people now, doing it for free. It's just like amazing the amount of attack and abuse you can receive right now just for doing what is different to what the average person does. Now, there's good reasons for that, and that is because when the average person sees you doing it, they start considering whether they should be doing it, and then there's a whole heap of conscience things that goes on inside of them, and then they don't want to feel that, and then they get angry because they don't want to feel their pain, and who are they going to get angry with? You need to go back to your original diet because then I'm not going to get angry about you being on a new one. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with all of that. Majority of us are not prepared to deal with any of that. We're not emotionally prepared from our childhood to deal with that. We're not resilient enough emotionally to have our own feelings and live in the world with our own feelings. Most of us need or believe survival is all about being a part of a community that all agrees with me one way or the other. And so we have huge amounts of emotion starting to come up now just for the choice of eating meat. So what began as a physical choice has now become spiritual, emotional, huge issues with people. Issues of love, so spiritual issues, and emotional issues like how intense is everybody's stuff coming at me about it all, and how bad it feels being condescended to constantly and all that. We're going through that, and those things will have a very strong detriment physically if we don't deal with them in an emotional manner. And so our health will degrade. So this is what happens. Health degrades. And then we go to the doctor, and the doctor says you need to eat meat again, and we go, oh, there's my justification. But actually the justification is far bigger than that. It's not just your health. It's how to save yourself from hundreds of people in your environment attacking you constantly about your choice.
Now I can fit in again.
Now I can fit in again. Now I can relax again, and people are going to get off my back, and people are not going to attack me all the time. And every time I go to the supermarket, there's only, there's vegetables and fruit and nuts, and then only a few other things I can buy. You know what I mean? Every part of life is restricted if you choose to, on the earth, if you choose to do something like that's good. And the average person on earth doesn't want you to do it because they're doing something bad and they don't want to know that, right? So there's huge amounts of emotional pressure. Now, the average person is going to get sick with that emotional pressure because they don't want to feel about it. They don't want to grieve it. They don't want to go through grief. If you're prepared to go through the grief, you'll go through a period where you go through the grief, come out the other end, And not only will you be fine on the vegan diet, but also you'll understand like what you eat far better and where it comes from far better. But also you'll be living in harmony with love now, which has its own positive benefits. But one of those benefits is not the agreement of everybody else who does not live in harmony with love. That's not going to be a benefit. But for most of us, it's one of the most necessary things we consider. We desperately want the agreement of everyone. So
if we compare that, not eating meat, to now, I'm not going to meet any of my emotional addictions with people, and I'm not going to meet any of theirs. Can you see that everything that Jesus just talked about in terms of people's agreement, people's approval, how society's going to... Now...
That's going to come up faster now.
That's going to be a lot bigger, isn't it? Because one's just what you put on your dinner plate, and people already have a lot of opinions, and you already have a lot of fears come up, and you already have all this stuff come up. When it comes to now, in every interaction I have with people, I'm not going to meet their emotional demands, and I'm not going to meet my own either. You can see why you suddenly go, oh, it's all too much, it's just so much, oh, I'm out, I'm going to sit here in my meandering journey, I'm just going to sit here for a while, because I don't want to contemplate what else. And then,
being one of the first people to practice God's truth, it's a hot kitchen.
It is. It is.
It's hard. You're going to find it difficult, not because it's actually that difficult, but because everyone else around you will try to make it difficult.
But it's very rewarding. It's very hot. But if you're sort of saying, I'm alluding to the part of your statement where you said, I've got to work. I've got no time to deal with all this shame and fear and all these other things. But actually, if you made that one decision, I'm not going to meet anyone else's emotional demands. I'm not going to meet my own. You're not going to have to make separate time to deal with your feelings or to discover your feelings.
Every day,
You're going to see them everywhere. You're going to be excusing yourself to go and feel things and come back. But it won't be something that you keep... See, God's way is not something that you just do at home and then you go out and just interact with the world. Now, God's way is a way that permeates and directs every action and interaction and choice and relationship that you have. And it's a process. So it's not like, oh, now I'm going to deal with my fear of aggression. I'm going to deal with my fear of violence. And I'll just deal with that and then I'll deal with the other things. That doesn't work. I tried that. That never works. Humility is a state of just being willing to feel whatever in whatever situation that you're in. And so sometimes your fear of violence will come up, sometimes, there's all my pandering to women, and but if you're humble, that's a process that can happen seamlessly, and you don't have to sort of set aside time for work and time for emotions.
In day-to-day life, it will come up all the time.
Yeah. You will take time for your emotions, of course. You will need to give yourself that gift of time and space on your own, but it won't be something where you have to develop your awarenesses on your own. Your awareness will come through the way you live your life.
Now, there's one other thing too that needs to be said. The whole idea that you're working and you've got, school to go to, work to go to, got relationships to uphold, and all of these other things, you're forgetting that they're all tainted by sin. And from God's perspective, God's not happy with any of the relationships that are tainted by sin. And by the way, you aren't either happy with them either. And God's not happy with you, deciding that sacrifice of your emotions is worth your work. Your work is more important than your feelings. God's not happy with that either. God feels that, no, your feelings should be all about your work, in the sense that you should love it. You should love your work. And the reason why you're in a relationship is because you should love the person. And that's why you feel drawn to have the relationship. And the reason why you do things in life, because you love doing them. And that's a part of your process of growing towards God's truth as to who you are. Now, if you choose to deny emotion or to suppress emotion for the sake of working, you're choosing to sacrifice your soul for what purpose? The purpose is lesser of value than your soul. Your soul is the pinnacle of God's creation. God desires that you treat it with the respect it deserves. Yes? And you deciding to sacrifice it for the sake of your work is not a beneficial action for your soul or your work. Your work will be less. It will be not able to be performed as well because your soul's not in it. And like I've had the experience myself of having many different types of jobs, and in almost every case my soul was in it. Like I used to clean schools. It was one of my jobs when I was younger, and I loved it. But I've done sort of electronics engineering. I've done building, built 13 houses. There's all sorts of things I've done that I enjoyed. And I enjoyed all of them, right? When you're in a state where you love things, you enjoy doing them, and you can also feel while you do them, right? But if you're in a state where you're choosing to sacrifice your soul qualities, of which your emotions are primary, as are your spiritual beliefs, and you're choosing to sacrifice your spiritual beliefs or your soul's emotions and even your sexual desires for the sake of work, which a lot of people do, right? Like, if you think about it, if you think about when you first get married, the average person would at least like to have sex once a day when they're first married, and they enjoy that process, right? And then 10 years down the track, is that still happening? 20 years down the track, is that still happening? Right? Why isn't it happening? And we say, work's got in the way and kids got in the way and all. No, they've all got in the way of your soul. Your sexual development is a part of your soul, right? You're sacrificing it for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because you don't want to work through things with your partner. You don't want to address things. You're sacrificing it for reasons, right? These things are going to decay your life. They are already causing a decay in life. Your joy in life is going to be sacrificed because your emotions are not present, your sexual feelings are not present, your spiritual beliefs are not present, and you're just doing the physical. Then there's a lot of things getting soul-based things getting sacrificed in your life for the sake of that. Now, there's going to be detrimental effects on you because of it. Your health, your well-being, your life, your relationships are all going to be impacted by that decision and choice, right? And so most of us are unwilling to confront the fact that we want the agreement of everybody in every aspect of our life in order to enjoy our life. Yeah. And that's not necessary. And in fact, if you want the agreement of everybody who's in hell, then the net result is going to be, where are you going to be? In hell too, with them. That's a fact, right? So you've got to stop looking for that and you start valuing the things God has values. You follow? And so when it comes to our sin, yes, it is true, as pointed out, that we have many. That's true. It's also true that we don't like to admit to ourselves we have many. But it's also true that if we did go through the process of becoming aware and removing them, that we're going to be much, much happier individuals personally than we've ever been before. Because all of our pain and suffering comes from our sin. And therefore it's beneficial to work through it. So a lot of these things begin with the problem with our faith, don't they? It's sort of like saying, but if I can't fit into society, then that's going to be bad. If I don't fit in with my family, that's going to be bad. In the first century, most of my family hated me by the time I was 25. I didn't live with them anymore because they hated me so much, right? By the time I was 33, some of them loved me again. By the time I was around 1800 years old, they all loved me again. Now they all love me. All of my family from the first century. But that wasn't always the case. You know, things change, people go through experiences. You know, if you sacrifice your own progress for the sake of anybody around you, you are going to be waiting for them and their decisions before you're happy, which is not what I would recommend to do. If I had done that, it would have taken me, well, I was just thinking about the last member of my family, which is one of my sisters actually. It would have taken me around 1,300 years to become at one with God. Yep. So, if Mary had done it, she'd still be in the hells. Her mum and dad from the first century are still there.
Wow.
Can't do that. Not good for you. Need more faith than that.
Yeah.
Is what we need.
Yeah. And I know we've talked a lot about physical sins on this tour.
Only because it's easy, right?
Because it's easy to demonstrate and so on. But if you deal with things higher in the hierarchy, you deal with a lot of things simultaneously.
Yeah.
So it's easy to look at your life and go, oh my gosh, there's this, oh my gosh, there's that, oh my gosh, and that, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And the feeling sometimes is have to deal with each one of those things individually. But if you deal with things, the spiritual sins that you have, you'll find that a lot of your emotional, sexual and physical sins no longer exist. You're no longer drawn towards them. You're sensitive to many things all at once. If you deal with the things in the higher you go in the hierarchy, the easier it is to let go of the things underneath. So that's something worth remembering, that if you deal with this in kind of God's order of importance, things simplify a lot. And all these little micro decisions that you might be worrying about on a day-to-day basis become very simple and easy.
Yeah. Let's give an example. Let's say I learn to love animals properly. Right? And there'll be a whole heap of things I deal with. I will probably no longer have a personal pet. I will also probably do things in the environment to fix the environment. I would also make it easier for native animals to survive. I would do things with the plant system to improve the environment to support life for animals. And as a subsequent result, it will also support life for humans. So in that process of just coming to love animals properly, I will deal with literally hundreds of sins regarding people and animals.
Yeah, because also you won't place you'll feel the hierarchy God has of where animals are.
So I won't place animals above people, because a lot of people with pets place their animals above other people. That, they'll even get angry with other people when their pet is not cared for, catered to. So, there's a lot of problems, obviously, that would all be ironed out if I just come to solve that one problem, right? So that's an example of a high thing of the hierarchy, filtering down into all aspects of my life, emotionally and physically, and they'd all get resolved. And it'll be like a seamless process of resolving them.
And you wouldn't have to think, I've got to do some things to repair the environment. You'll just feel naturally drawn to. It's not a duty then.
No. So in the God's Way organisation that Mary and I are founders of in Australia, one of the programs is an environmental repair program. And the reason why is because everybody who has come to the point where they, feel the sin of their past behaviour with regard to the environment, everyone wants to somehow fix it. And so there's these programs that we've got going to help people engage that on a practical level so that they can understand what's involved in fixing it. And it's very interesting because the more you understand what's involved fixing it, the more you realise I don't want to do the damage in the first place. Right? Because there's a lot involved in fixing an environment. It takes years and years compared to not doing it harm in the first place. So, and then you start recognising that with sin generally. It's far better to not sin than it is to sin. I think it was in England, we drew a line on the board. I don't know if any of you have seen that in a video. Remember, we drew a line and said, here's the law. This is the line of the law, if you like. Then what happens on this side when you break the law, whereas what happens on this side when you uphold the law. And on this side, breaking the law, there's the consequence of breaking law and so forth, but there's also, you have to repair it from God's perspective. You've got to compensate for what you did, and you've got to repair it. Now on this side, when you uphold the law, you don't have to repair anything. This is nothing that was broken. Right? And you don't have to compensate for anything because you did nothing wrong in the first place. It's a lot simpler to obey the law than it is to not obey the law and then have to pay the penalty. The problem on earth is that many of us have gotten away with penalties in our childhood, gotten away with breaking laws, and so we start thinking, it's actually easier to break the law. But it's not actually. It's not God's law. Like human law, I don't know, a lot of human laws pretty pointless, really, aren't they? Some of them have been created for good reasons, but for the majority have been created for the people who sin. And if nobody sinned, then you wouldn't need a law that says you must not murder, would you? If everyone felt equal to their brother or sister, when are you going to murder somebody? You wouldn't even contemplate it, right? It's only by me feeling that I'm better than Mary that I contemplate hurting her in any way, right? So obviously, if I loved, I wouldn't need that law. So in the end, if you love, you don't need any law, and everything will be smooth because you love, and that's automatically in harmony with every law God's created, right? So it's actually simpler. But most of us don't think that way because our corrupt faith is saying, no, if I break the law, I'm going to get away with it. If I break the law, things will be better. If I break the law, I won't have to feel certain things. So if I break the law, I'll get pleasure now. These are all things we're telling ourselves which are not true. But we believe they're true. And while we believe they're true, we're going to keep doing them. Yeah. Because that's what corrupt faith does. It just keeps doing what it believes in. Yeah. So, in answer to the question there, the whole meandering around and the whole, what do I do now? How can I get back to simplify? The simple thing is really this. Love, truth, faith, humility, action. If I develop those principles in myself as qualities, every part of my life will change for the better. Every single one of them. I won't have to worry about each individual sin because by dealing with these things, each individual sin I'll become aware of it very rapidly. Yeah. But I'll also get to the point, because of humility and faith, I'll get to the point where I want to get rid of it as well, right? Because of developing those qualities. Yeah? You could say the highest of the governing principles. In 2016, the third assistance group, if you see that on our website, you'll see there was an assistance group called God's Loving Laws. Remember that, for those of you who've seen that? Yeah. These are the primary principles driving that, right? Driving those principles. There were 17 principles mentioned in there. If you bring your life into harmony with those 17 principles, you line out almost every sin you have. Right? Every one. But you're going to have to do it emotionally. It's not going to be an intellectual exercise. Yeah. And that's where it's a challenge, because you're going to have to, when people condescend to you, emotionally you're going to feel something.
Yes.
When people attack you, emotionally you're going to feel something. Right? When people disagree with you and want to fight with you, Emotionally, you're going to feel some things. And this is what most people are not prepared to do. They're not prepared to go through those emotions. So whenever we're in a stagnant place where things are not sorting out, it's because we're not prepared to feel the emotions driving our sin. In other words, fundamentally, we're not prepared to be humble. The depth of humility that God requires. Does that make sense? Not the depth of humility that we think, but the depth of humility that God requires. That's going to be very different to what we think it should be. And when I look at it myself, I go, almost every single benefit I've ever experienced my entire life has begun with my own humility. Then it required faith. And then after that, it was all about God. God's truth and God's love. But it began with me needing to be humble and needing some faith. That's where it began. Every single thing I've experienced. I would never... there's people in this spirit world who have never met their soulmates still. There's people in the celestial kingdom who still are not with their soulmates. Right? All the benefits that have come so far for me in my life has begun because I chose to do it on earth in the first century, to the point where I actually met Mary on earth in the first century. Right? I had all of these experiences on earth. They weren't all easy experiences, but they all taught me so much about love. I experienced God's love on earth, and this has made it a lot easier for me to discover all the things I've discovered since. Right? Without that, so you could see these things here. You could say these things have to become yours. They're mine. These things are God's. Yeah? So all I can do is change the things that are mine. So if I focus on humility, faith and taking action in harmony with the faith and in harmony with the humility and in harmony with the truth that I receive from God and the love that I receive from God, if I do that, change is inevitable. Inevitable. Dealing with your sin is inevitable as a result. Yeah? So it's not as hard as what most people think. But everybody who hears divine truth normally takes a solid 15 years, generally, to get to the point where they realise they have to deal with their sin.
That's doing the regular.
Sooner or later, yeah. It normally takes about that long. And it's not really a joke. I'm serious about it. In the spirit world and on earth, by the way, it normally takes at least that period of time to want to deal with their sin. Because after a while you start saying, if I could deal with my sin faster, I'll be happier sooner. I'll be closer to God sooner. I'll be closer to my soulmate sooner. What's there to not like about it? It's really just the emotions. And the interesting thing about dealing with sinful emotions is you start having the capacity to feel any emotion. So at the moment, for many of you, terror is like an emotion you can't bear. And even grief, for many of you, is an emotion, true grief, emotion that you can't bear. Right? But I can bear it now. I've got the capacity to experience grief for weeks at a time. I can handle it. And knowing that about me makes me feel stronger and more capable and makes me understand that God designed me as the pinnacle of his creation who can cope with anything. And it gives you a lot more confidence and assurance, and you know you can bear any situation, right? And you can walk in the world with a lot more confidence as a result because of that. So having emotional capacity while you're dealing with your sin, it's tricky because a lot of it's painful, but you're also learning to stretch yourself emotionally to be able to experience positive emotion. Because it's a lot easier to experience positive emotion than it is to experience what you'd classify as negative emotion. And so the more capability you get to stretch your capacity to experience, the better your life's going to be in the future, because in the end you'll be without sin and with the capacity to experience huge feelings that are all good, all loving, all in harmony with truth and love. And so that causes you to have the capacity to have more joy as well. So it's not a process to sort of worry about too much, you know. To my mind, sin is just a
Temporary.
It's a temporary piece of mud, isn't it? Really. And you experiencing it emotionally is washing it off. Yeah. And then by doing that and repenting, the cause, the reason why you chose to do the sin, also can get taken away. And now you don't want to sin that way ever again. And it's much easier than going through compensation and reparation, which is the way that everybody else without God does it. Much easier process. So I'd recommend it.
Okay.
And by the way, there's like every celestial spirit would recommend it. Yeah, everyone. Yeah.
How is it possible to be in the celestial kingdom and not know your soulmate? I heard you say that. It seems, from what I've understood,
Yeah.
you say that by the time you reach the fifth sphere, typically or often,
Yeah.
by that point you know who your soulmate is. So that sort of surprised me to hear that.
When did you say that? Did you just say that?
Did I hear it wrong?
You said you're not with
together.
them.
You're not with
I think I said not with them.
Yeah.
Oh, so I misheard it. Sorry.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I
Thank you
might
for
have
clarifying.
missaid it, but I thought I said I'm not
No,
with
I
them.
probably
I
misheard
said that.
Yeah.
That's why I was. Oh, I missed something.
Okay, you're not with them. That's different than not knowing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But still happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you, or how did you release your, or get to this faith level where it was okay, or you didn't feel, so you're not afraid of losing your physical life?
Yep.
Where you just tell the truth, and if your physical life goes, somebody kills you, you don't try to avoid that.
Well, you see, you've got to have faith in your spirit life, don't you? So, you know, the way, in answer to your question, the way it works for me is that in the first century, I was pretty young when I realised that I wasn't just a body anymore. Most people who hear divine truth, they're fascinated by. So, if you think about your life, you've got your soul, your half of the soul, and you've got your spirit body, right? And you've got your physical body. Let's put them in sort of like a hierarchy now, right?
Uh-huh.
So physical body, spirit body, soul. And it was pretty early in my life that I realised that I wasn't just that. Right? That I also had a spirit body and a soul. Now, when I say early, I was probably about 6, something like that. You know, it was earlier than that because I was talking to spirits before that.
Yeah.
It's just, it was just coming to the awareness. Oh, you know, when you're developing as a child, you often do a lot of things without really knowing what it means. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I was talking to spirits way before then, but I didn't know that meant what it meant. But when I was quite young, like I said, about 6, I realised, oh, I've got a spirit body, but that means I have one too. You know, and a soul. I was starting to feel conscious of there being like a seed. The way I used to see it was like like an almond seed or something, like a seed that, you know how seeds all split in half? You know, it's quite fascinating. So when I was young in the first century, I thought about these things, and why is a seed made with two halves? It's weird, eh?
Mm-hmm.
You'd think, like a lot of nuts in particular, are made with two halves. Strange, if you think about it, because a lot of other seeds don't seem to have two halves. Like, you know, you look at a millet seed or something, it doesn't seem to have two halves. But then a lot of things like nuts do have. And I go, interesting. And I started feeling like these are telling me things about humans, right? In terms of, you know, what would happen to a human. And so I often thought of myself as just a half of a person already by the time I was that age. And my other half is out there somewhere, is the general feeling I have. And also I've started seeing myself as not the physical body anymore, right? Because I was talking to these spirits and interacting with them, and me and John, not John the Apostle, but John the Baptist, we, you know, would often be talking to spirits as well. He was a good medium as well, so we'd often be chatting away to spirits as well, learning a lot of things from them. And this is one of the things they educated me about, particularly about the spirit body and the physical body. So I knew that I wasn't just a physical person. And in learning their life, I learned that they just had a very short life on earth. A lot of them. Some of them only lived like 30 years less on earth. And then they lived a long time in the spirit world. So I started realising my future isn't on earth. My future's in the spirit world. Right? Now, in coming to terms with that and working through that emotionally, I came to feel that my body dying, hopefully it wasn't going to be too painful. Obviously it turned out being pretty painful, but my body dying wasn't really a problem because my life would continue. I had a spirit body. And by this stage, you know, by the time I was in my teenage years, I could see the spirit bodies of others. So I could see that everyone had one. And I knew I had one. And so this then caused me to feel like reality. Faith turned from faith to reality. Once it becomes real to you, do you care anymore about your physical body? You only care about looking after it, caring for it, but you don't care if you lose it. And you're certainly not going to choose to lose it for the sake of telling a lie, and you're going to be okay with losing it for telling the truth, but not for telling a lie. So, in other words, I started to have some moral fortitude where I go, well, there's certain things I don't want to compromise, because everything. By this stage, I was developing a relationship with God, and every time I noticed somebody compromising truth, their relationship with God was compromised, and their brightness of their soul degraded, and like it caused a decay in their spirit body that I noticed, and you know, in their what you call their aura, I suppose. You know, I could see. I didn't think of it like aura or anything. It was just colours, the colours coming out of it, and so going, well, why would I do that? Right? Why would I do that? There's no reason to do it. Given the fact that my life on earth is short anyway. And then once I realised who I was, I realised my life on earth would be short, because a bigger part of the work needing to be done was establish the celestial kingdom and to inform all of the spirit world that the celestial kingdom was also open to them. So I started seeing my bigger purpose of life was really not to spend it on earth, not that time, but rather to spend it educating people in the spirit world. So I was wanting to stay with Mary still, of course, on earth. By this stage, you know, I'd met Mary and I wanted to stay with her, of course. But I'm not going to compromise a principle to stay with her, because to do that would be to compromise our soul, and therefore compromise the joy of our future. So after a while, that becomes a very solid feeling within you. But it's got to be an experience you go through. You follow? So the experience I went through was eventually my faith turned into reality. So an example of that is, at the moment, many of you can't see spirits, right? Right? Some of you can, but many of you can't. When you do, how do you feel your faith will be about spirits? Can you see, if you could see them, your faith would go up, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes.
At the moment, it's just what you hear about, and you're fascinated about it, and it's interesting, and some of you think you can talk to them at this stage, but if you can't see them, it's sort of like, well, is it really true still? There's still this sort of element of faith required, right? But when you see one, the very first time you see one, right? After that, are you more convinced or less convinced?
Of course not.
Yeah, more convinced, right? So when you pass from faith to reality, your conviction turns from faith to reality. Right?
Yeah.
So let's say an example of that physically. Let's say I told you there's this device, right, that you can actually have, that you can pick up, and it's just about this big, right? And you can talk to other people from around the other side of the world, right? And you can see a picture of them while you're talking to them from the other side of the world. And not only that, you can play games on it, and you can do other things on it. You can not just talk, you can take photographs, it's stored, you can have maps, and you can actually walk around and it will show you where you are, everywhere you're going. Now, of course, you know I'm describing a mobile phone, right? But if you've never seen one, and imagine you were like, the only thing you'd ever had in your life was an axe and a shovel, right? You'd be going,
Even telling your mother and your grandmother in their early life about this device,
Right.
it would have been.
yeah, they would have gone.
That's
Crazy.
It was like, it's like the first people who, said flying was possible. Like there's, once you saw the reality of it, you now no longer need faith in it. Because it's so real to you that you just pick it up, and you don't even think. Because it's just normal life, right? And it's the same with regard to learning God's truth. You'll go from a place where you have to exercise faith in order to grow, till you get to the point where some of the things start happening to you that become absolute reality. So what happened when I became at one with God in the first century is I became aware that I was immortal now. I couldn't die. Nobody could actually kill me, and not only could nobody kill me, that God wouldn't even. Right? God couldn't even.
Wouldn't want to.
Well, he wouldn't want to, but he couldn't, because I had part of his love in me, so he couldn't. Once I recognised that, then why am I afraid of death? There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. And there's a lovely verse that my friend John wrote that's recorded in your Bible. Perfect love throws fear aside, right? And that's exactly what happens. Once love is perfected, you don't fear anymore. Now, as you grow, you will grow towards that place. So initially, you'll start off where people attacking you, you'll feel afraid. People attacking you, people condescending to you, you feel, life's a bit scary now, what's going to happen to me? You worry about things. What happens when your husband doesn't like you anymore? What happens when your children don't like you anymore? And you worry about all these things. But as you grow, and as you gain more and more stronger relationship with God, and it turns from just a figment of let's call it your faith, a figment almost of your imagination is how it probably starts, right? Into reality. Once it becomes reality, people around you will, doesn't matter what they say, doesn't matter what they do, it's true. And if you know that a mobile phone exists and you were put in the middle of a jungle where nobody's ever seen one before, and you sit down and you don't have a mobile phone, but you sit down and describe it to everybody, and they're all going, it sort of sounds pretty far-fetched, right? But when you bring it to them and show them it, it turns from faith to reality. Alright? The people who exercise faith before reality is proven end up being the strongest people. Can you see why?
I can feel it,
Yeah.
like you, because you would have developed a strength in what you don't see yet,
Yes.
or what you don't have
Well, you-
particular evidence yet, or you.
Well, you do have evidence, you see.
Yeah, you recognize evidence before you actually.
Well, you recognise evidence in your soul as a priority over your bodies. So what happens when you exercise faith? Faith is a soul quality. So what happens is evidence gets established in your soul first, and then it distributes to your bodies. Right? So when you develop faith, you're developing a soul quality where evidence appears to your soul first. And then your awareness, your intellectual and emotional awareness, passes from your soul to your bodies. Right? And so the people who develop faith are developing their soul first. Their soul qualities are being developed first. They're not having to see in order to believe. They're having to feel in order to believe.
Okay.
And feel is a sensory apparatus of the soul, not of the spirit body's eyes and mind.
Do you need the faith in order to then get to the place of having the reality?
Yeah, like, so you get to a stage where you develop these qualities, but they're all developing in the soul, right? Your soul strengthens. Its ability to feel things strengthens. Its ability to understand things strengthens. You're receiving God's love, so your ability to get things from God directly strengthens. You're able to receive and hear things from God directly. That all strengthens. It all filters down to the rest of you over time, to your mind and then to your bodies over time. But it starts here. Because it started there, you are going to be the strongest you can be. Because that's where the strength is in your soul. That's where the capacity for growth is. That's where your future power is. In fact, in the end, you might not even need these anymore at all, and everything will be there. Right? So developing that first is of primary importance to your future. The problem on earth is that we have been taught to desensitize from our soul the most. So you think of what people on earth feel about feelings, about emotions, about senses even. Like even the senses of touch, for example. Which senses have a primary importance? Usually it's eyes, then hearing. But who really worries very much about the sense of touch? Right? But actually it's one of the most important senses you have to determine how things feel. Right? You can touch textures, can't you? And your body's been so well made that you can feel even the smallest, down to microns thick, of changes in a surface, for example. That's how sensitive the sense of touch has become, right? You think about what brings you joy. What you see brings you some joy. What you hear sometimes brings you some joy, sometimes not, probably. But what you taste or smell and what you can touch and feel, they often bring you the most joy. Right? And that's because your soul has been designed to be more focused on these things that you can't see and you can't hear. Right? Because there's a whole heap of senses in your soul that are all about those things. The ability for you to feel and to experience things emotionally are of supreme importance to you. And the reason why they are is because they bring you the most satisfaction and joy. Right? So by developing these senses of the soul, of which faith is one, by the way, so is humility, another actually. There are senses of soul. By developing these senses, if you grow in those senses, you will end up being the strongest person you can be more rapidly. Right? On earth, of course, nobody believes that. But that's how, in the end, you will end up with the strong feeling of confidence. Not just confidence. It's like it's not the right word. It's
Conviction.
Conviction's not the right word really either, because it's reality. It's like when something becomes real to you.
Knowing?
It's not even a knowing, really, is it? It's like an automatic. It's automatic. It's not even like if you know, like you guys go to sit on. You see a chair. You don't go, oh, I know that chair. I can sit on that chair. Do you?
Yeah, right.
You just do it.
Yeah.
Because you have so much like awareness that it's real, that you know you can place your backside in it and safely do so for the most part, right? So, and that's the thing that humans have created. What about all the things God has made that are that real? There is like God's created so many things that are real that the average person on earth knows nothing about at all. But in your soul, as you exercise faith, you will come to know. Yeah? So this quality of faith is so important. Of course, the quality of a corrupt faith is also important.
It's very powerful.
Very
driver,
powerful,
isn't it, of your
isn't
whole
it?
life?
Yeah, because you feel it's real.
Because you feel it's real when it's not. So, it's a very powerful driver of your life too. So the quality of faith is a very important quality to develop one way or the other. And sometimes people with corrupt faith end up having the strongest real faith too, sometimes.
It's strong.
Because, they had to develop this sense of things without seeing them, without hearing them first. Yeah. Okay?
On that note, I wanted to ask this question for a while. Is God's gift of being able to teleport while still connected to your physical body, once we do the work and we get one with your soulmate, is that limited to just the returning 14, or is that gift available to any of us?
Well, firstly, I don't know whether that's going to be available. All I do is feel that it's going to be.
Ever since I heard you mention it,
I didn't do it in the first century.
Oh, okay.
I didn't teleport in the first century. I didn't even think of doing it, to be honest. I enjoyed the experience of walking with people, talking to them. I didn't want to sort of bounce around the place. Also, when I met Mary, she was walking and talking and other things, and I liked spending time with her. I didn't want to leave her for any reason, really. So I never considered, teleporting as a concept or an idea. Does that make sense? I might have been able to do it. I don't know whether I would have been or wouldn't have been, because I never tried. I never even asked God about it in the first century. It wasn't important to me. Of course, as soon as I went to the spirit world, I knew how to do it and knew how to go from place to place, as most of you will know straight away or soon after you pass to in your spirit form, But I never tried to do it on earth. So the answer to the question is, I don't know. I know it's possible. And I know historically there have been people on earth who did it. And I've met some. There were people who lived in what you know as Lemuria or Atlantis, and these people used to use teleportation as a method of getting from one place to another. And sometimes as groups and sometimes as individuals, and they would also teleport materials. I know it's possible.
I sense that it would help me become more in harmony with God's laws of love, time, energy, and matter in some instances. Do I need to rent a car? Do I need to, different things.
Yeah.
I could save some time, I could save some matter, I could save some energy. I just look at it more
It
less
seems like it's in harmony with economy and function.
And there's plenty of evidence, spirit-based evidence that it happens. The issue then becomes, though, when do you introduce it as a concept to society? That's a tricky thing, isn't it? Because how would people on earth use it at the moment?
Not wisely.
Whoa. You think about that and you go, whoa. It's like,
Especially those that had it before others.
sorry?
Especially those that could do it before others.
Yeah.
No.
Now, of course, if they were in harmony with love, it wouldn't be a problem, would it? But in the process of exposing it to the people who are harmonious with love, the information about the reality of it being real automatically gets passed to everybody. So it's like the very first persons who flew, everybody else now knew flying was possible, right? And so that makes them strive harder to find out how to do it. You follow? So the problem with it becoming well known on earth, like many things becoming well known on earth, is we have to question how it would be used. And also what kind of things you could say about it. So let's say one of us at some point in the future decides and understands how to do it. Let's say. Is it wise to share that knowledge with everybody? That's a good question, isn't it? Because if everyone's in a condition where they don't love, it would be quite dangerous potentially to share that knowledge. And this is why there's actually a lot of knowledge in the spirit world that's not getting shared. The way the law works is that a spirit who tries to share it is inhibited from communicating the information to Earth. Yeah.
Based on condition of love?
Based on the love.
Inequality?
Yeah, that's right. It requires a certain condition of love on Earth before that information can be shared.
Okay.
And the information can't be shared while the condition on love Earth doesn't match that condition. Yeah. And so even if one person comes to know how to do these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of us are going to find out how to do it. Does it? And also, you've got to be careful about what everybody comes to know as real. If they come to know that certain physical things are real before the spiritual things are real, then of course there's certain problems with that love would consider. So these are things that would need to be considered in the future, whether a person can teleport or not, by the person who could teleport. Yeah. But can you see that if one person did, then faith in teleportation would be improved, wouldn't it? But not necessarily faith in anything else. Do you follow?
I enjoy walking too.
Sorry?
I enjoy walking too.
You enjoy walking? Yeah, Mary and I do about 8 to 10 k's a day on a good day, and that's what we like doing too. But at the end of the day, I would have found teleportation very handy on this trip.
I like customs.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you'd have to consider the ramifications of such things, wouldn't you? And if you loved, you would. Yeah. But for a person who is in harmony with faith, they would already know what's possible. A person who doesn't have faith has a fair amount of disbelief, don't they? The biggest thing we have the most disbelief about is dealing with our sin. It's actually the biggest conspiracy on earth. The anti-sin conspiracy.
Or the upholding sin.
The upholding sin conspiracy. Yeah, it's a huge. Like, if you look at the momentum of where Earth is headed in terms of the spiritual condition, there is less and less concept that there is such a thing as sin, and that is the cause of our pain and suffering. There's a huge momentum towards anything is okay, you know, and everything's getting reframed from being a sin into being something that's good. as well, you know. And this is happening everywhere on earth. This whole concept that there is no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as a next life. So deal with this one sort of mentality as well. Yeah. And I'm not suggesting not to deal with this one, but unfortunately there's a lot of emphasis on getting the maximum out of this life to the detriment of the next. Yeah. So having faith, as you correctly say, you have faith that you won't die. You have faith in a lot of other things too, mind you, you know. But having the confidence to and the level of reality in terms of in your heart about truth and love, you get to the stage where it's so real to you internally that nothing is going to shake you. It doesn't matter how many people attack you, it doesn't matter how much abuse there is, it doesn't matter, you know, how bad things go on earth, because in the end of the day, all that is because of the environment that's here, the hellish environment that's here, and it's not because of any of God's truths that these things are happening. And you get confidence in that too. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, what's the time? Must be pretty late. Yep, definitely. Yeah, so what I was thinking tomorrow we may do is we'll talk more about some sort of practical issues associated with the sins and dealing with sin, and also developing an attitude where you're interested in them, in the sense of, like, what I've noticed is a lot of people feel about their sins as, oh no, you know, there's this sort of feeling of, oh, not sin again, and there's also this sort of icky feelings of guilt or shame that a lot of people have, which are actually, these feelings are feelings that prevent you from discovering them.
Yeah.
Do you follow?
Being curious and investigative about, you know, your sin and what's driving it. That's really what's required if you're going to awaken.
Yeah. You can have some fun with discovering your sins.
You can.
Rather than...
You can.
Yeah, you can actually. Rather than feeling all like complicated about it all the time, right? And so I was hoping that tomorrow you might help engage in some fun exposing different sins.
Well, it brings levity and humor. Like, I don't mean humor in a negative way, but get a good laugh at yourself.
Yeah, not seeing them as if they're a part of you.
Right.
I think that's the biggest liberating thing that I find about dealing with sin, is that you realise, oh, that's not a part of me. This thing that is icky is actually not
It's
me.
mud.
It's stuff that can move. It's stuff that is not going to be eternally with me. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And you two have done a fabulous job in the time that I've listened. The non-self-blame. What was done to you as a child was put in you, you absorbed it.
Yeah.
All you got to do is feel it and release it. It's not like, oh, I feel awful that I inherited this, or you really draw the line to say self-blame is not going to get you anywhere.
It doesn't.
And
Judgment gets you nowhere. It just shuts down the emotional process.
Because what you're going to find in this process is the majority of your sin is not actually what was put into you when you were little, it's how you've acted since. The decisions you've made with your own free will.
Yeah.
But self-punishment doesn't really have a place in that process either, because it just stops it all as well.
Yeah.
It's being responsible. You do feel guilt, you do feel yuck sometimes, but if you remain curious, you also learn a lot about yourself and the potential to develop character.
Yeah.
You know, that's a very rewarding process, to develop your own character and realise I can do better than I've been doing. I can deal with pain. I can make loving choices, even if that's opposed around me.
And if you can repent for just one thing that you know is in you, that is a result of whether it's your ancestry, it's something as a child, and if you can go through one intense repentance experience, it's like it like creates a mold. Like I survived that.
Doesn't it?
It grows your faith, because once you know that you can survive that, and then it's like a template.
Yeah.
So now you have a template. So then you go, well, how do I feel about repenting about that? And then, you know, take 3 days off and get ready, or whatever you feel you need to do because you survived it. You know you're going to get there.
And you knew last time you did it.
Yeah.
So you got some more confidence this time.
Yeah. It's a genius plan, actually.
Yeah.
It really is.
God's a genius.
Yes.
Yeah.
As you would expect, right?
It is beautiful.
I think you have to grow faith that you're going to be forgivable.
True, but that requires more faith in God's nature than it does in yourself. Sometimes the things that I've found the most difficult to develop are things in yourself rather than in God. So having some faith in God's nature is relatively easy to develop, but particularly once you get rid of the stuff with your parents. It's relatively easy to develop faith in God's nature, being good, and therefore God wanting to forgive you. Also, the more open to the conscience you become, you can feel God telling you that he wants to forgive you for different things as well. So that develops a positive feeling inside of you about that. The more difficult things you're going to have are not about whether God's going to forgive you, but whether you're capable of going through the emotions that allow you to be repentant in the first place. You know, that's going to be the more difficult thing to do. And that's where most people struggle. Developing some confidence that you will be forgiven, well, that will happen the very first time you're forgiven. You'll have that confidence after that God wants to do that. But when it comes to actually working through getting to the point of repentance, that's the difficult. The difficult part is that's the time from awareness to awakening, and then to feeling that you want to repent for what you've done. That period of time is the most difficult and sometimes the most time consuming in terms of our progress. But that all being said, just getting back to the fascination thing, I do find it fascinating how many sins have been created by humans. It's fascinating what we do just to get away from things. And how far we'll go just to get out of feeling something.
Slippery.
It's just full on, and what we'll do and what we'll say and how we'll act, and man, it's just amazing inventiveness of the human soul coming up with ways to get away with something.
I always say, if only we could use those powers for good. That inventive, creative spirit.
If we put as much effort in good things as we did in preventing our awareness of our own sin, we'd all be masters of the universe by now. You know, I find it so fascinating. It's like, isn't it? You look at the Earth today too, and you look at how much development goes into, say, weapons of warfare. And then you compare that with how much development goes into something that's actually good for humanity, like fixing the environment. It's what the? You got one, there's so much effort and time and energy put into just to make money out of killing people. And then on the other, something that could support developing our environment to the point where it could support tens of billions of people easily, and nobody puts any effort into it. In comparison, blows me away how dedicated we are to our sins. Yeah. And even that's very interesting. Why? Why are we so dedicated to upholding them? We're crazy nutters, eh? Trying to uphold sin. It's just destroying our life. And yet we do it. It's I find it so fascinating. And this is why it's something that we can discuss more tomorrow. We get to know a bit more about our sin and why we do it. And also, one of the things I'd like to feel about tonight is how it feels when you're fighting for it.
See if you can catch yourself
See if you
fighting
can
for it.
feel the fight.
Or remember how you fought for
and
it.
try to connect with that feeling of it emotionally, because You need in the moment, in your future, you need, in the moment you're defending your sin, you need to know what that feels like. Because otherwise you're not going to change that. You need to know what it feels like.
It's incredibly helpful once you start to recognise those feelings, because you go, oh, okay.
There I go again.
Here's
There I go
something for
again.
me to deal with.
Yeah. And also you're able to then recognise, every time, no matter what the sin is, this is how it feels like defending it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is one of the things I do to defend it. If you can get rid of all your defences, can you see, you'd probably recognise your sin like hundreds of times faster, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
If you could get rid of all your defences.
And we're like, what are you defending? When you really get down to what are you defending? Self-reliance
Well,
versus God-reliance?
Corrupt faith.
Corrupt
You're
faith.
defending corrupt faith.
Yeah.
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 And what's the point of that? There's no real point to it, is there?
No.
Not benefiting you or anyone
Pointless.
else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, these are things we want to discover or talk about a bit more tomorrow. But if you can go home tonight and your homework exercise is what are your methods of defending your sins? How does it feel when you're doing it? How does it feel?
And try to focus on the feeling.
Yeah.
You can feel the feeling of it.
Yeah. All right?
Okay. Thank you.
We'll see you all here at 11.
11 tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 11.
Good, okay.